Stephen arranged bodyguards from the Leviathan unit and the palace to tighten the security around the villa. Just as he was about to head back to the Elysian realm with Emmett and Seth, Aston came over. Mr. Adams, Warhawk and Maplewood have sent a delegation team to Annapolis for a visit. They requested to see you. I'm a civilian now. Interaction with higher-ups should be left to the upper management. Even though you've retired, you're still the pillar of the U.S. If they see you in person and know you're alive, they'll have to think twice before scheming anything. Stephen wasn't the sovereign anymore, but his presence in the country held considerable weight. It took more than a few days to wrap up loose ends. He'd agreed to meet with the delegation team before returning to the Elysian realm. The villa's low-key, luxurious furnishings with the handiwork of famous designers across the country, they were constructed with priceless materials and resources, making the villa an ideal location to receive prestigious guests. That afternoon, Hilskin and Walter came to visit. They were old acquaintances with Stephen. Your home is like a paradise. It's a beautiful place to live after retirement, Hilskin commented, looking around at the extravagant decorations. Based on the number of years you've been head secretary, isn't it about time for you to retire as well? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. The temptation of power is hard to resist. Beating around the bush was pointless when people of their status were involved. Hilskin, Stephen, and Walter exchanged honest words as pleasantries. The three of them went to the hall with smiles on their faces. Hilskin observed Stephen's every action. His movements were fluid and natural, and there was no scent of medicine in the house. This proved Stephen wasn't injured, and there was nothing wrong with his health. As for Stephen, he couldn't wait to get down to business. He sat down and got straight to the point. Thank you for visiting me out of concern, old friends. As you can see, I don't have any responsibilities as I used to. I'm an ordinary civilian. Please don't ask me questions beyond my status. Hilskin and Walter weren't swayed. Who would believe such a blatant lie? Of course. We were just curious about your decision. You're a smart and capable young man. With you at the helm, the U.S. has nothing to worry about. Why did you choose now of all times to retire? Ever since the recent battle, I've realized that power can bring about negative consequences to my allies, Stephen began. He gave Hilskin and Walter a descriptive and exaggerated recount of the latest crisis by weaving lies with the truth. The damage to Annapolis's terrain was his doing. His cultivation had progressed to the point where a single wave of his hand could destroy an entire city. If he remained in the position as the sovereign and continued to work closely with the military, there might come a day when he injured his own companions. And there you have it. I'm a martial artist at heart. I can't let worldly affairs distract me. Hilskin and Walter fell silent. Stephen's words aligned with the intelligence officer's information, but the message was completely different. He'd become so strong that he couldn't be measured by human standards anymore. It's truly our fortune to have befriended a capable martial artist like you, Mr. Adams. I hope you can continue to use your talents to protect our world from the sidelines. It didn't take long for their conversation to end. Bragging and making baseless claims that couldn't be proven were more effective than demonstrating the United States' strength through a military exercise. Hilskin and Walter left the villa with more vigilance and caution than when they started. They were very worried that provoking the U.S. would cause their own downfall. Stephen watched them go. With their luxury cars disappearing into the distance, he went back to the Elysian realm with Emmett and Seth. The Haven domain was peaceful. The disturbances from the ancient cultivators had long since vanished. His phone buzzed with messages the moment he crossed the rift. They were all from Vivian, asking about him and Liam. Before he had a chance to reply, Emmett steered him in the opposite direction from the city. The exam is in a few days. Mr. Wren wants to give you special training. Emmett and Seth took Stephen to Wren's courtyard in the bamboo forest. The secluded location and the bamboo swaying rhythmically with the wind made it easy to enter a meditative state. Wren greeted him with a smile. I heard about your decision in the human realm. It's smart to move to protect the people around you. His words of praise didn't lessen the incompetence Stephen felt. The truth was that he was too weak to fend off the ancient cultivators, and giving up his position was an act of surrender. The military's upper management had decided that with the ancient cultivators continuing their pursuit of the weapons manufacturing factories, they would meet their demands to preserve the country. Because this was a unanimous decision the upper management made without Stephen, the responsibility would fall on them and wouldn't be considered an act of betrayal towards the Mystic Covenant. My cultivation's at the bottom of the list compared to the other new members. I don't stand a chance in the exam. Wren nodded in agreement. So you understand. That's why we're here. We're going to change that. He led Stephen to a room in the basement of the courtyard. There was a large furnace raging with flames at the center. It was used to refine cultivation pills. Wren waved his hand. A ball of fire separated from the furnace and drifted to Stephen's chest. The flames dimmed and turned a pale red color. This fire resonates with cultivation. The stronger you are, the brighter it'll be. Did the prophet explain the classification system of cultivation in the Elysian realm? Ores and crystals are highly valued across the 6 realms. Our system is based on their characteristics. From low to high, cultivation is ranked as bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, starshine, and monarch. To put the classification system into perspective, the ancient cultivators you fought in the human realm were at a gold rank. To take them down in one blow, you would need to be at least 3 ranks higher, which is the starshine rank. You are at the level of ascension, which is equivalent to the bronze rank cultivation. If you can't break through to the silver rank within the next few days, you'll place at the bottom of the exam. Wren threw a yellow talisman into the furnace and distorted the flames into a vortex. You have an extensive understanding of fire, but comprehension is endless. Enter the furnace and train. You'll come into contact with flames of different attributes. Stephen cast a wary glance at the furnace. He could feel the scorching heat from here. I don't think I'm at the rank where my body is immune to all kinds of fire yet. What if I'm turned to ashes? Wren patted his shoulder. Don't worry, I'll be here to watch over you in case things don't go as planned. His words weren't that reassuring, but Stephen braced himself and rushed into the flames. Waves of heat swept past him. He condensed a barrier to withstand the boiling temperatures. It was broken through in less than a second. The heat penetrated his skin and surged into his internal organs. He felt like he was being swallowed by the flames, like an herb about to be refined into a pill. In a moment of desperation, Stephen remembered the slits on his palms. He activated them and began to absorb the flames in the furnace. Even if he couldn't assimilate the fire into his body, it was better than resigning himself to the fate of being barbecued in some furnace in the middle of the wilderness. Wren was sitting calmly at the table he'd set up at the doorway, drinking tea to pass the time with Emmett and Seth. The body is a powerful weapon. With continuous refinement, both its offensive and defensive will increase. A physical weapon, like a sword, won't always come in handy. Don't rely on them too much. Emmett and Seth nodded and proceeded to give Wren an update on the investigation in the human realm. They were ashamed because, as his strongest students, failing to find traces of the ancient cultivators was a disappointment. Wren didn't blame them. NATO Run has become more low-key and reserved compared to the past. Maybe they hadn't given up on the human realm's technology and are waiting for the right time to launch another attack. Should we station a team in the human realm? Seth asked. The higher-ups won't agree to that. The Mystic Covenant's goal is to maintain peace and order across the 6 realms. We have a long list of vicious criminals waiting to be captured. We can't spend all of our time on the ancient cultivators when we don't know where they are or when they're going to attack. If we empty our faction of combat forces, our headquarters will be left defenseless. Emmett and Seth's faces fell. They wouldn't be surprised if the ancient cultivators took over the human realm one of these days. They looked over at the furnace and saw Stephen sitting in the fire. The flames flickered with different colors. His cultivation was steadily improving, but they didn't know how many years it would take for him to reach the same rank as the ancient cultivators. Don't be discouraged, Wren said. The faction will pay attention to the human realm. Don't forget that the humans have a powerful ally. The celestial beast will step in when necessary. Mariah's factory on the outskirts of the Haven domain had become an unusually popular spot lately. Most of their customers were new members of the Mystic Covenant. The exam was coming up, and to show off their skills, they needed to purchase new weapons or forge and upgrade their own. The Sheridan brothers hadn't given up on the factory. They needed to form a partnership to develop their family's mining business. In the Elysian realm, ores and crystals were divided into grades. Not every cultivator spent money to purchase the best raw materials, but it was a different story when the materials were used to forge high-quality weapons. It was crucial for the Sheridan brothers to find a suitable factory to partner with. Otherwise, their storage of ores and crystals would keep piling up and collect dust in the warehouse. The Sheridan brothers entered Mariah's factory with intricate fans in their hands. When they fanned themselves, the heat wave was restricted to a certain distance. The air remained cold and refreshing within 3 feet radius around them. One of Mariah's students was hammering away at a slab of metal. It's been a while since I've seen your factory's honorary dictator. Where has Stephen been? Your factory can't be doing that well if he's never here. Mariah's student wiped the sweat off his forehead and turned around. Are you two here for a weapon? Our prices and quality of our products are one of the best in the industry. We're not interested. What we want is an exclusive contract for the supply of precious ores to your factory. It's a cost-effective and profitable deal in exchange for management rights." Mariah's factory had plenty of suppliers, and the Sheridan family was only one of the many. They weren't satisfied with the current amount of profits. Mariah had taught his students that forging high-quality weapons depended on a variety of factors. High-grade and low-grade ores and crystals were both valuable depending on the type of weapon and the wielder. Rather than being caught up in the troublesome business matters, Mariah's student wanted to concentrate on forging weapons. "The honorary director is in charge of business matters. You should talk to Mr. Adams about this instead of me." "Is that so? What if Stephen died in an accident? Will Mr. Mariah come back to manage the factory?" It had been some time since Mariah's student last saw Stephen, and he'd heard rumors that something serious had happened in the human realm. He didn't know if the rumors were true or whether Stephen was safe, but the factory's business wasn't up for him to decide. "Before the rumors are clarified, the factory's management won't change. I'll ask Mr. Mariah later for his opinion." Having achieved nothing, the Sheridan brothers left empty-handed. Their hatred for Stephen deepened. Mariah's retirement had spread across the realm. He was a man of his word, and he wouldn't be coming back to the factory. Even if something had happened to Stephen, he would likely replace him with someone else to take charge. Stephen never attends training sessions. He doesn't cultivate and spends all his time in the human realm. Maybe he was killed in the recent crisis. I don't think so. Mr. Wren is the same as always. If his new student was really dead, he wouldn't be walking around the faction like nothing happened. Let's wait and see if he shows up to the exam. If he's alive, we'll ruin his meridian so he'll never cultivate again. We're not killing him, so it's not against the rules. Without strength or wealth, he won't be qualified to manage the factory anymore. Unbeknownst to the Sheridan brothers, at this very moment, Stephen was receiving a cruel special training from Wren in the furnace. The flames with varying attributes would remold his body and upgrade his defenses. The night before the exam, Wren finally extinguished the raging flames. No matter how well Stephen's cultivation was progressing, it was time to let him out. He stumbled out of the furnace with a thick layer of charcoal covering his skin. His energy reserves and stamina had been exhausted after days in the furnace. Wren condensed a light breeze and swept the charcoal off Stephen's skin. His clothes were stained with soot. Wren held out a clean set of clothes. "Change into this. I don't know how much of your cultivation has improved, but your defenses should have doubled." "Every time I absorbed the flames, I had to use it to form a barrier to ward off the heat. I couldn't store that much of it." "It's fine. The process of absorbing, circulating, and releasing has to pass through your skin, muscles, and bones. Your body was strengthened whether you were aware of it or not." Stephen didn't have the energy to comprehend what took place in the furnace. He pushed open the door next to his room, changed his clothes, and slipped under the covers, falling asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. The leader of the Mystic Covenant never cared about examinations for new students, but this time he made an exception and set a requirement. The 3 emissaries left the faction's headquarters and rushed to his residence for clarification. What is he thinking? Why would he hold the exam in the human realm? Wouldn't that reveal our faction's secret techniques? This is a warning to the ancient cultivators. They can hide, but not for long. Our influence extends across the 6 realms. The faction leader wasn't worried about the secret techniques being leaked, because the ancient cultivators used the most outstanding members they had. As for the martial artists in the human realm, how much they could comprehend would depend on their luck and talent. It would save the faction a lot of trouble if the exam lured the ancient cultivators out of hiding and encouraged them to take action. The next morning, when the examinees went outside to the courtyard in front of the training ground, they found a large array engraved into the ground. Considering its size and complexity, it probably took all night to set up. Cushions corresponding to the number of examinees were neatly placed side by side. When everyone was seated, the 3 emissaries began their speech. The exam was held to test their cultivation progress. Those who performed poorly would have their resources decreased. Those who performed particularly well would receive additional rewards, like weapons, equipment, and cultivation manuals. Everyone had their eyes on the prize except Stephen, who was busy observing his potential opponents. Shaddle and the Sheridan brothers were eyeing him with hostility. After spending days in the furnace, he'd broken through to the silver rank, but his 3 enemies were at the peak of the silver rank. They'd break through any minute now. He hoped he wouldn't be matched against them at the beginning of the exam, because he would lose without a doubt. Yvonne appeared fashionably late in a casual outfit and skipped to the seat next to Stephen. Because she was the daughter of an elder, everyone treated her with respect, and most people agreed with everything she said. Their false pretense was annoying. Stephen and Liam were the only ones who spoke to her like they were equals. It was too bad Liam wouldn't be coming back to the Elysian realm for some time, but at least Stephen was still around. Ren forced me to cultivate for the past week. Must be nice having the freedom to go around doing whatever you want. Cultivating in isolation sounds a lot better than being targeted by ancient cultivators and almost losing my life. The problem is, you care too much. If you focused on your cultivation like the rest of the new members, the ancient cultivators wouldn't have had a chance to target you. A phantom of an ancient bell appeared above the training ground and blotted out the sun. The pressure silenced the side conversations in the crowd. As the bell descended, darkness enveloped their surroundings, cutting them off from the outside world. The bell rang, and the crisp and melodious sound resonated with the fear locked in the depths of their hearts. Stephen's consciousness was drawn into his internal world. His surroundings blurred and divided in half. Scotty's snowy plains and Guran's mountain range came into view. Two familiar figures charged towards him. He couldn't forget their faces even if he wanted to. On the left was the leader of the Tribulation sect, Augustus, and on the right was the leader of Tempest Citadel, Thorin. His cultivation had surpassed theirs, but the fear of the danger they posed to his companions at that time would forever be engraved in his heart. Augustus and Thorin's swords came together, condensing a cage of light above Stephen. He shattered it with one swing of his sword. If he hadn't witnessed Augustus' death and wiped Thorin's memory, he would have been able to see through the illusion. The bell had captured their cultivation and replicated them perfectly. His cultivation was now higher, and they had a lifetime of experience. This wasn't a battle he could win in a short amount of time. Thorin's techniques were familiar. Each strike was accompanied by spatial fluctuations. In Stephen's eyes, Thorin and Augustus were both far and close at the same time. He couldn't pinpoint their exact locations. The familiar talisman of the Tribulation sect swirled around Augustus. They deflected Stephen's strikes every time he attacked. Stephen pointed his sword at the clouds. The energy from the sun, moon, and stars were drawn into his blade. The aura in his sword and the natural elements from the celestial bodies fused together. Under ordinary circumstances, the natural elements repelled one another, but in his world he was the law. Stephen pointed his sword at Thorin and Augustus. Golden rays of light penetrated their bodies, but their wounds didn't bleed. Their torn clothing and their wounds returned to their original pristine state. Stephen summoned the Zodiac horse. Out of the 12 Zodiac beasts, it was the fastest. He leaped onto the horse's back and it ran circles around Thorin and Augustus, leaving after images behind. Not even mountains, streams, lakes, or swamps could slow it down. Stephen condensed the Fire Phoenix. When Thorin and Augustus sliced it to pieces, its flames came together and reformed its body. The Phoenix's fire burned endlessly. Nothing could extinguish it. Stephen remembered the first training session he attended at the Mystic Covenant. At that time, the senior members had taught 2 cultivation techniques, one of which increased mental energy and decreased interference. He took a deep breath and recited the spell he'd learned. His voice projected across the illusory world, laced with the spell's effects. He sensed Thorin and Augustus's auras begin to weaken. The Zodiac horse changed direction and charged straight at them. The past can't be changed, and the dead can't come back to life. Flames enveloped Stephen's sword as it swept across Thorin and Augustus with the force of an army. Their bodies turned to ashes. Stephen's internal world returned to normal, and his consciousness went back to the real world. When he opened his eyes, he found himself sitting on the same cushion in the same spot. The bell was still overhead. The other members opened their eyes one by one. There were many who'd failed the first round and had to be carried out of the training ground. Stephen had worked his way up the path of cultivation from the very bottom. He'd gone through years of trials and hardships, which slowly strengthened his mental state. In comparison, many of the new members had been born with a silver spoon to the wealthy families in the Elysian realm. They had guidance since they were young and were given a hefty supply of cultivation resources. Their lives were smooth sailing, but this was a fatal flaw during the exam. Their mental energy wasn't strong enough to resist the illusion. A few minutes later, Yvonne, who was sitting next to him, also opened her eyes. The complicated expression on her face was a sharp contrast to her usual happy-go-lucky demeanor. I almost lost my mind from that nightmare. Stephen gave her a questioning look. Isn't your mental energy pretty high? You weren't affected even though you watched the Celestial Beast and the Asura Kings match from beginning to end. I obviously prepared for that in advance. I made sure to wear leather armor, arm guards, and boots that deflected mental interference. A fight between gods is no joke. You have to protect yourself well. But I can't wear all that during an exam. Yvonne was an exception among the faction members and her fellow students. She'd been Ren's student for years, but her cultivation had improved so little that she was required to attend every training session. She'd participated in so many exams that she lost count. Because of her status, she was free to do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. Training sessions and exams were the few responsibilities she had. 4 hours later, every examinee woke up. Before they had a chance to adjust their condition, a mass of energy flashed inside the bell. The 5 natural elements had their own distinct color. The examinees felt the heat of the flames, the biting cold, the sharpness of wood, the inescapable binding of metal, and the heavy suppression of the earth. This was the power of nature. Panicked voices came from the crowd. How are they stimulating this many elements at once? They have a natural repulsion. It doesn't matter what we do. Our techniques usually carry one force. It'll be swallowed in seconds. Many of them thought this was an illusion and condensed a barrier. Stephen did the same. Out of the 5 elements, he was most proficient with fire. He created a barrier of flames. Floating balls of light containing different elements separated from the mass and approached the crowd. One of them contained the element of water. When it touched Stephen's barrier, the outer flames froze into a thick layer of ice. It fell and shattered to the ground. His barrier was on the verge of collapse. If he stayed here, he'd be waiting for death. The deeper a cultivator's understanding of the 5 elements, the closer they were to a perfect state. At the peak of perfection, the cultivators themselves turned into the ubiquitous laws of nature. They would have a clear advantage over those who didn't have a deep understanding of the elements, even if their cultivation was at the same rank. Stephen had comprehended the fire, water, and earth elements for many times as he used the Killen, Ice Dragon, and Threadworm's spiritual energies. But his understanding of the other elements fell short. He avoided the floating lights, but there wasn't much room to evade the massive energy at the center. While he was debating whether to use the slits on his palms, the other examinees learned from his tactic and moved to avoid the floating lights. The courtyard became unusually lively. The elders and emissaries in the distance shifted in their seats nervously. They knew the massive energy wasn't an entity the new members could handle. Don't they know how to use the elements to guide the floating lights and keep them at a distance? If they keep running around, they'll get themselves killed. Why didn't you explain the conditions of success and failure before the exam? The faction leader will punish all of them if they fail. Should we stop the exam? If they haven't been properly trained, they'll come up with all kinds of weird ideas and hasten their death. There haven't been any serious injuries or deaths yet. Let's wait and see. The minority obeyed the majority opinion. After a brief discussion, they decided to continue the exam. They infused some of their energy into the floating lights to control them in a worst-case scenario. The intense chase inside the bell continued. The Sheridan brothers found Stephen among the examinees. They didn't mention it, but this round won't end until a certain number of members fail. There's so much going on. No one will notice if we accidentally kill him. Attacking someone else is prohibited, but in a chaotic exam like this, accidents can happen. If you run and dodge, you'll bump into someone eventually. It's unavoidable. If we push him into the floating lights, even if he doesn't die, he'll at least lose half of his life. After the exam, Mariah will hear about the bad news and hire someone else to be the honorary director. Most people are swayed by money. Stephen is an exception. With him out of the way, our partnership with the factory is sure to succeed. The exam itself was full of danger. Accidents were inevitable. Stephen heard the rapid footsteps behind him. He subconsciously changed direction to avoid them, but they followed him closely. He glanced back and recognized the Sheridan brothers. Fighting is prohibited in this round. Why so nervous? We admire the prophet's student very much. You must have learned a variety of skills. Can you divine a safe route to avoid these floating lights? Without warning, they pushed Stephen to the center of the courtyard. Their voices were loud, and the other examinees heard their conversation. Everyone flocked to Stephen and crowded around him. The Sheridan brothers smiled unapologetically. Sorry, it's crowded. It can't be helped if we bump into each other. Stephen ignored them and steered the crowd to the edge of the courtyard. The ghost fire in his sword couldn't divine the future. It could only predict an opponent's strike based on the extensive experience with weapons. The Book of Destiny could only divine a person's future, not floating entities. The floating lights were everywhere, and he didn't know what to do except keep moving. The dense crowd limited his movements and put their own lives at risk. They were more susceptible to coming in contact with the floating lights as the crowd. As Stephen ran, he infused the threadworm's spiritual energy into the ground to extract metals from the earth and created a magnetic field. Its fluctuations were strongest at the edge. The vibration and attraction resonated with the metallic weapons the crowd was carrying. Waves of aura were randomly released into the air. Accidental injuries, panic, and anger dispersed the crowd. The chaos was worse than Stephen imagined, but at least it was harder to run into the floating lights when they were spread out. When the Sheridan brothers rushed for him again, he controlled the magnetic field and attracted a cluster of scattered weapons on the ground, sending them in their direction. It was a small trick, and it barely had an effect, but he was able to slow them down. The elders and the emissaries were forced to step in. It's a complete mess. If we continue this round, they're either going to start killing each other or accidentally run into the floating lights. Many of them have been injured. Exclude them from the next round. That will meet the criteria to proceed. The phantom of the ancient bell slowly dimmed until it disappeared. Sunlight filtered into the courtyard, alleviating the chaos and panic among the crowd. The three emissaries hurried over with their subordinates to carry the injured examinees out of the courtyard. Congratulations on making it to the next round. We can't reveal the details, but it'll be more difficult than the first and second rounds. It'll take place in the human realm. We'll be leaving in 5 days. Make the best use of the time you have left to prepare. Out of all the examinees, Stephen was the most surprised by the emissaries' announcement. He couldn't understand what they were planning. The ancient cultivators were hiding in the human realm. If they found out about the exam, another battle would ensue. He didn't want to ruin the peace they'd worked so hard to achieve, but there was no changing the Mystic Covenant's minds. When Stephen left the building, he saw Vivian waiting for him at the end of the street. "Where have you been? I couldn't reach you or Liam." "We're busy. Liam's in the human realm. You won't be seeing him around for a while." Anticipation flashed in Vivian's expression. "Are you heading there too? Take me with you." "Why? Aren't your mercenaries busy with missions? Do they have time to come with you?" "I can go alone. The elders have been pestering me to get married again ever since I told them our fake relationship ended after the competition. If I go to the human realm to sightsee, they won't be able to bother me there." Shaddle was watching them from across the street. During the exam, he'd seen the Sheridan brothers target Stephen, but they'd failed to injure or kill him. "I never see them intimate with each other. Are they really in a relationship? Whether they're together or broken up, he's always lingering around Vivian. I need him gone for a chance to get close to her. How's his jewelry store doing?" "It hasn't been open for business for some time now," his bodyguard replied. "They'll close down soon." "Okay, round up the mercenaries you hired. Tell them to sneak into the human realm and pretend to be the ancient cultivators when they attack Stephen." "Are you sure about this? The ancient cultivators are the Mystic Covenant's enemies. The faction's been hiding their betrayal for years. Their existence is a stain on their reputation, and they'll stop at nothing to get rid of them. If the mercenaries pretend they're affiliated with the faction's enemies, things won't end well if they find out." "Just do as I say, it'll be fine. The Mystic Covenant isn't that familiar with the human realm. They can always escape as a last resort." Shaddle was insistent, so his bodyguard had no choice but to follow orders. Wren was satisfied with Stephen's condition after 2 rounds of the exam. Most of the examinees had sustained varying degrees of internal injuries, including Yvonne. When the floating lights approached, they resonated with their energy and disrupted their circulation. Stephen was still in peak condition. Training in the furnace for the past few days had paid off. "You did well, but don't relax your guard just yet. The next round won't be easy." Wren didn't say it out loud, but Stephen knew that he was warning him about the ancient cultivators. He was also worried about them. "Did the faction think this through? I know they're using the exam as an excuse to lure the ancient cultivators out of hiding." "You're not the sovereign anymore. Don't worry about these things. Just take care of the people around you." While that was true, Stephen couldn't just stand by and watch as war broke out in the human realm and innocent lives were lost. That night, he laid awake in bed, unable to sleep. He sat up and took out the Book of Destiny to try to find the ancient cultivators. He gathered his spiritual energy at the tip of his finger and touched the first page. As the energy flowed into the book, he visualized an image of the ancient cultivator he'd encountered. The book began to glow, and colors appeared on the page. Just as they blended together into a vivid painting, the light rushed into his eyes and invaded his mind. The book fell from his hands as he collapsed on his side and clutched his face in pain. He reached out blindly and fumbled to close the book. The relief was instant. He laid there gasping as he waited for the rest of the pain to subside. The gap between his cultivation and the ancient cultivators was too big. The backlash was strong enough to kill him, but he couldn't give up this easily. He still had time to meet the prophet before he had to return to the human realm. The Dragon Clan's castle was eerily quiet under the cover of night. They maintained a neutral position across the 6 realms, and it was rare for hostile forces to provoke them. At the gate, the guards blocked Stephen's path just as he was about to go in. "I'm the prophet's student. I'm just here to talk to him." "We rarely have visitors in the middle of the night. How do we know you're not in disguise? Prove your identity." Stephen had forgotten to bring the prophet's necklace with him when he came back to the Elysian realm. To make matters worse, the 3 dragons were in the human realm, and he didn't have anyone to vouch for him. "I had a premonition that the prophet had something important to tell me. He should know why I'm here. Please let me in." The prophet had a unique ability, and even the clan members closest to him hadn't been able to learn the art of divination. Stephen was an exception, but his claims couldn't be proven. The guards looked up and saw that the light in the prophet's room was still on. They'd be in trouble if something serious happened because they stopped the prophet's student from seeing him. They turned back to Stephen and gave him a stern warning before letting him in. The fragrance of tea drifted through the doorway of the study when Stephen walked in. "I told you before, the best way to avoid disaster is to stay away from this mess. You've given up your position. Why do you care what happens after?" Stephen lowered his gaze in shame from the prophet's scolding. "The Mystic Covenant is holding an exam in the human realm to provoke the ancient cultivators. I can't stay out even if I wanted to." The prophet let out a long sigh as he picked up his staff to divine the future. The more he saw, the deeper his frown became. He set down his staff, and the light in the room faded. "The ancient cultivators will be hunting down the astral thief soon." "Why? Did he get into trouble again?" "Do you remember the deal we made when you first came to the Elysian realm? In exchange for making you my student, you were to get the medicinal fossils. The Ares stole from the Dragon Clan and returned them to me. The ancient cultivators' companions are injured. Back then, they were once given a mission to capture the astral thief. He escaped in the end, but they found a medicinal fossil on him. In the present, they're going to track him down to see if he has more." Stephen's eyes widened. He knew Thierry was going to get himself in trouble one of these days, but he didn't know it would be this soon. "Before I came back to the Elysian realm, he told me he was going after the ancient cultivators to find the special liquid they use to strengthen their bodies." The prophet shook his head with another sigh. "This is a 2-way disaster waiting to happen. Thierry returned the medicinal fossils, so he doesn't have them anymore. If the ancient cultivators don't find what they're looking for, they're going to investigate who created them. The Dragon Clan will become their next target." "Is there a way to stop this from happening?" "Find Thierry and tell him to stop what he's doing. If the Mystic Covenant is holding the exam in the human realm, they'll also be setting up traps for the ancient cultivators. He can't be too far." Stephen didn't waste any time. He said goodbye to the prophet and left to find a suitable location to return as close to Annapolis as possible. He opened a spatial rift with the bone blade and stepped inside. The new members had gotten used to him skipping training sessions. It wasn't a big deal if they didn't see him for the next 5 days, or if he didn't go to the human realm with them. Ren would come up with a random excuse to cover for him. When Stephen arrived at the villa, it was early in the morning. The guardians of the palace noticed him in the yard and went out to greet him. "How'd the exam go? You're back sooner than expected." "It's not over yet. The next round will be happening in the human realm. Ask the military to mobilize reconnaissance satellites and search for anything unusual across the world. The Mystic Covenant will have to send people here to set up their testing site." Stephen glanced up and waved at the ice dragon, who was sunbathing on the roof. It landed on the ground, displacing a storm of dust and leaves. He leaped onto the ice dragon's back, and it took to the skies. They searched for Thierry and the members of the Mystic Covenant for half an hour until he received a message from Aston. The military had found energy fluctuations 400 miles north of Verglas Strait. This area was covered in mist, and the satellite couldn't see beyond. The ice dragon changed direction and headed north. Stephen was familiar with the area. It was near Scotty's snowy plains, where the ice castle of the Tribulation sect used to be. The ice dragon slowed down when they reached the Verglas Strait. "The energy fluctuations are straight ahead. I sense the auras of a group of cultivators. If we break in, we'll attract their attention." "Fly above the clouds," Stephen instructed. "We'll observe them from there." Around a dozen members of the Mystic Covenant were hovering above the ocean. They were setting up an array in the air over a small island. The complex diagram was engraved in the mist surrounding the island. Typical arrays were attached to the ground or inanimate objects for stability reasons. This was the first time Stephen had seen an array in the air. It's like everyone says. The Mystic Covenant has valuable manuals you won't be able to find anywhere else. I wonder if I'll be able to read and comprehend them. If you keep cultivating, Ren will give you one eventually, the Ice Dragon said. The island was likely the testing site for the next round of the exam. Stephen was annoyed just to think about confronting Shadow or the Sheridan brothers face to face. After hiding in the clouds for some time, a familiar face came into view. It was Tyrek, an elder from the Mystic Covenant. He was here to check on his subordinate's progress. How's it going? Is the array complete? We've released aquatic beasts near the island and set up the array in the mist. If the ancient cultivators show up, we'll be ready to capture them. Good work. Be careful when the exam starts. If it was that easy to capture them, the Mystic Covenant would have been done already. Deep under the ocean in the core of the meteorite, NATO Run and his team were crowding around their companions who'd woken up recently. He assessed their conditions and found that they were far from making a full recovery. His subordinate, Parati, tried to reassure him. Waking up is a good sign. We just need to find herbs to refine medicinal pills. I remember the Astral Thief had a bunch of precious herbs in his possession back when we ran into him. When we attacked Annapolis, we saw him next to Stephen. He might have settled down in the human realm. Should we send our people to look for him? There's no rush. Let's deal with the Mystic Covenant first. Before betraying the faction, Nadorun and his team traveled across the 6 realms on missions. They had spies everywhere, and they hadn't changed after hibernating for thousands of years. They recently caught wind of the Mystic Covenant's exam. The 3rd round would be held in the human realm. They were also up to date on recent events in Warhawk after a brief investigation. The highest authority in the country was their parliament. The higher-ups were from wealthy and royal families who'd been around for hundreds of years. Nadorun had taken control of the Robinson and Whitman families and forced them to sign a contract. When a cultivator signed a blood contract with a beast, they were given access to their spiritual energy, which they could manifest in the form of their unique power. In comparison, Nadorun's contract removed the Robinson and Whitman families' independence and free will. Nadorun took 3 members of his team with him and headed to Warhawk. Warhawk's parliament was at the center of power in the country. It wasn't the tallest, but it was the most eye-catching building. At this time, Hillskin was reporting to the head senator, Merrill. I've visited Cadis and the U.S. Stevens retired and handed his authority to the military's upper management. He's no longer responsible for national affairs. The upper management aren't as sharp or intimidating as him. Merrill took a drag of her cigarette as she drummed her fingers on the desk. She was a cunning politician, and she wasn't fooled. The U.S. military was putting on a show. As long as Stephen was alive, he could easily return to his position and take back his authority. What are our chances of winning if we start a war with the U.S.? And what does Walter think? He's taking a conservative approach. He's afraid after visiting Stephen in person. It's hard to say what our chances are, but our businesses in Cadis have stabilized and returned to the way they were before Stephen restricted their market. It was clear that Maplewood wouldn't be taking action until Warhawk broke through the United States' first line of defense and was certain they would win the war. They would wait until the climax was over before coming to pick up the leftovers. Every politician in Warhawk's parliament had a set term. Merrill was no exception. To go down in history as a successful leader, one had to make good use of their term and shock the world. For example, occupying the U.S. and expanding Warhawk's territory. She was itching to start a war. More of the conflicts in the U.S. past few years were her doing. She'd instigated smaller countries to attack their borders. Who is behind the recent incident in the U.S.? Find them and get them on our side. Their whereabouts are unknown, Hillskin replied. We've been sharing intelligence reports with our allied countries, but there's no trace of the culprits. We have to wait for them to make a move before we start a war. Meanwhile, Nadorun and his team had arrived in Warhawk. Most of the wealthy and royal families had built mansions in the suburbs, making it convenient to visit more than one of them at the time. The head of the Whitman family and the core members were sitting expressionlessly in the living room. A faint red glow was in the depths of their eyes. While Nadorun made his appearance, they robotically knelt in greeting. Bring me all the information you have on Warhawk's military department. It's time to prepare for an overseas operation. The head of the family placed an encrypted laptop in front of him. The information included the nuclear weapons head Senator Merrill had under her control and a detailed map of where the military was stationed. The range of activity for the land-based team was limited, and the Air Force was subpar. NATO Run had to turn his attention to the naval force at sea, but there weren't that many of them. What's going on? Why is your military so unbalanced? Our fleet was almost wiped out by an ocean disaster on a mission trip some time ago, the head of the family explained. Mobilizing a squadron to carry out an overseas operation isn't a decision that can be made by one person. The Parliament's higher-ups will hold a vote. The majority overrides the minority. Their decision will most likely not align with our interests. Many of their families have set up companies or factories in the U.S. or their neighbors. They don't want their income to be affected by a war. The currency in the human realm had no meaning to NATO Run. Decisions were driven by strength, not money. Unfortunately, Warhawk's naval force was a disappointment. Why don't we control the higher-ups? Perotti suggested. Not everything can be resolved by force. You can learn a thing or two from the humans. They're weak, but their strategists are one of the best across the 6 realms. Take their industrial development, for example. A highly efficient factory can produce an endless supply of weapons and equipment. They'll be ours in the future. But back to the topic at hand. Warhawk also has a supply of weapons. If we use the excuse of transporting them overseas for military exercises, there shouldn't be a problem, right? We'll make preparations, the head of the family said. The Leviathan unit and the palace were concerned for Stephen's safety after finding out about the energy fluctuations in the middle of the ocean, but he didn't give them any orders. He didn't want to openly interfere with the Mystic Covenant's decisions. During the next few days, the ice dragon flew over the Virgilus Strait with Stephen on its back to observe. The array is absorbing cold energy from the low temperatures. It's affecting the entire island. You'll be at a disadvantage during the 3rd round. Most of Stephen's techniques were driven by fire. He wouldn't be able to cast them to their full extent with the array looming overhead. He also wasn't allowed to summon beasts during the exam. The exam isn't that important. I don't think the elders and the emissaries care too much. Their priority is capturing the ancient cultivators. According to the prophet's divination, it would be in Stephen's best interest to hide his strength during the exam. In the evening, the ice dragon flew him back to Annapolis. A guest was waiting for him at the villa. It was Dr. Dalton. It had been a long time since they last met. Ever since Dr. Dalton implanted an AI chip in Warhawk's researchers, Mitty and Amber, he'd been monitoring them. They held important positions in Warhawk's Military Research Institute, and recently their colleagues have been given an order to transport their half-finished weapons. Stephen took a seat across from him at the dining table. I'm guessing there's more to it if you're coming to me before the Leviathan unit? Dr. Dalton nodded. It's not that noticeable, but I believe there's been a shift in power among the higher-ups. The head of the Whitman family was the one who proposed to test the weapons before they were finished. This doesn't align with their country's goals, but quite a number of higher-ups approved his decision. The head Senator Merrill has been waiting for an opportunity to target the U.S. She's been strengthening their military in secret, and she's made it clear that she doesn't want to spend manpower, resources, or money to test unfinished weapons overseas. According to the data at the Research Institute, these weapons are incomplete, and they're not worth testing. As an outsider and someone who wasn't experienced with the inner workings of Warhawk's parliament, it was hard to grasp the political drama of another country. Stephen thought about it, but he couldn't follow Dr. Dalton's line of thinking. The head senator is ambitious, but she doesn't necessarily have the final say. Isn't this the decision the higher-ups made after holding a vote? The higher-ups who agreed with the head of the Whitman family are from distinguished families who have conflicting interests. It's unusual for them to support him. Someone might be working behind the scenes and manipulating the votes. Dr. Dalton's speculation was close to the truth. Exerting influence over Warhawk's parliament was the first step in the NATO-run scheme. The next step was to instigate a war by launching an attack on the U.S. using Warhawk's unfinished weapons. There was an unwritten rule in the world of cultivators. Those who descended to a higher plane shouldn't interfere with the lower one, especially the realm they originally came from. The ancient cultivators had a nearly indestructible body, but staying in a lower plane for an extended period of time put them at risk by the laws of nature. If they continued to challenge the laws, lightning from the heavens would strike them down. After wrapping up that they came to the human realm to do, they were planning to go back to the Elysian realm as soon as possible. However, Dr. Dalton didn't have evidence, and there weren't enough leads for Stephen to go on to figure out the purpose of transporting unfinished weapons or the culprit's identity. For now, ask the Leviathan unit's intelligence team to investigate Warhawk's parliament. As for NATO Run and his team on the other side of the ocean, every step of their plan was progressing smoothly. After taking control of the Robinson and Whitman families, their influence had expanded in a short time. They'd even set up a martial arts dojo with a security company as a cover to train martial artists to fight for them when the war broke out. Time passed quickly, and 5 days were almost up. The Bowen family's mercenaries began to make their move. Shaddle's bodyguard had spent a hefty sum of money to hire them and sneak into the human realm to assassinate Stephen. As for Shaddle, he was anticipating becoming in-laws with the Bellantine family. Stephen was the only obstacle in his path. He stayed home and waited for the good news. The mercenaries appeared on the rooftop of a 5-star luxury hotel in Annapolis and searched for the location marked on their map. The human realm is prosperous, but I can't sense the auras of cultivators anywhere. This is a world run by weaklings. I wonder how Stephen managed to ascend. That's not important. Focus on the mission. He's a silver-ranked cultivator. There's nothing to be afraid of. Shaddle had given them a generous reward for an easy mission. The cities in the Elysian realm prohibited fighting, but that rule didn't exist in the human realm. The military administration building was particularly eye-catching, and the villa not too far away was hard to miss. The mercenaries locked onto their destination and leaped into the night. Stephen was lounging on a bench in the garden, watching Kim practice her swordsmanship. The Leviathan unit's leader had taught her as much as he could. How much she comprehended and retained would depend on her hard work and talent. Kim diligently swung her sword, but the force behind it didn't match the strength she put into the strike. The higher your energy reserves, the stronger your techniques will be. Want to practice activating the slits on your hands? Stephen suggested. Sitting all day is boring, Kim grumbled. Swinging a sword is much more exciting. Stephen let her be. No matter how fast she improved, every cultivator reached a bottleneck at some point. Kim wasn't an exception. In a worst-case scenario, she'd be stuck at a certain point in her cultivation for years or even decades. It wasn't easy to become an ascender. Stephen caught a faint aura surrounding the villa and sat up in alarm. The guardians of the palace were nowhere in sight, which meant that the intruder's auras surpassed their perception. He summoned the iridescent dragon. Your senses are much sharper than mine. Can you find out when they're hiding? Of course. The iridescent dragon condensed bubbles to widen its field of vision. They drifted with the breeze around the garden. They're at least at the level of ascension. They're probably from the Elysian realm. Stephen didn't bring Kim inside the house. He led her to the bench instead. As she improved her cultivation, experiencing fights between cultivators was unavoidable. It would get better if she got used to them early on. The iridescent dragon initiated the attack. The bubbles burst into needles and rained over the intruders hiding on the roof. They dodged the needles, but they couldn't avoid all the droplets. An illusion came to life before them. Hundreds of dragons with snapping jaws and outstretched claws filled their vision. What's happening? Kim asked Stephen, looking up at the roof. Just some intruders. Should we join the fight? I'll go. Stay here and observe. You'll learn a lot from watching cultivators fight. Numerous defensive arrays had been set up throughout the villa. Even if Annapolis was blown to smithereens, this villa would be safe. The sounds of fighting alerted the guardians of the palace. They surrounded Kim to protect her and apologized for not realizing they were intruders. They're at the level of ascension. It's normal you didn't sense them, Stephen said. Should we inform the military? Aston asked. No, I'll handle it. The intruders were wearing masks, but Stephen didn't have that many enemies in the Elysian realm. He had an idea of who they worked for. He materialized his sword and leaped onto the roof to join the iridescent dragon. The intruders threw him a contemptuous look. You have a decent beast by your side, but that won't save you. We've never failed a mission. They were experienced mercenaries who'd steeled their hearts. Mental interference had no effect on them. They brandished their weapons and lunged for Stephen. He motioned for the iridescent dragon to head back to the ground and raised his sword to defend. Their blades clashed, and metal sparks flashed in the air. The intruders were forced to step back. To prepare for the upcoming third round, Stephen had been spending his free time absorbing energy from ores and crystals and assimilating it within his body. The intruders staggered for a moment before launching another attack. Waves of aura from their swords enveloped Stephen like a storm, but he wasn't fazed. The ghost fire could predict the trajectory and position of every strike as long as it was from a sword-type weapon. He stepped to the side, and the whirlwind of auras brushed past him, crushing into the roof. The intruders circulated their speed and dashed around Stephen in a circle, forming thousands of after-images. Stephen threw out a ball of fire. It drifted erratically through the air before landing on the blades of their weapons. The scorching flames moved up the blade and traveled up the hilt, forcing the intruders to stop and abandon their weapons. Stephen summoned the Zodiac Rat. It multiplied into a horde in the span of a few seconds, covering every inch of the garden. They crawled up the intruders' legs and bit into their skin while they were putting out the fire on their weapons. Where did these disgusting things come from? Brush them off. No wonder he's fearless. He has more than one beast by his side. Your reaction's slow, Stephen commented. Those rats carry an incurable illness. It's transmitted through their bites. The intruders exchanged nervous glances. Their clothes were full of holes, and the bite marks covered their skin. Under normal circumstances, these would be minor injuries, but an incurable illness was a different story. Shaddle's bodyguard was overlooking the assassination from a distance. He knew tonight was another failure. He transmitted his voice to the mercenaries, telling them to retreat and recover before coming back. They unleashed another storm of auras, but it was just a feint. When the light dissipated, Stephen was alone on the roof. The Guardians hurried over. Should we track them down? No, it's too dangerous. There's a big gap between your cultivations. Stephen knew the intruders were working for someone else. Whether they died or not didn't make a difference. The horde of rats disappeared, leaving only the Zodiac rat's real body behind. It pounced on Stephen's shoulder and dug its claws into his shirt before proudly showing off its contribution in a series of squeaks and words. Their skin was so hard to bite through, it wasn't easy to leave that many marks behind. But what did you mean by incurable illness? The rat tilted its head to the side, looking confused. Stephen brushed its fur with his hand. I was just bluffing to scare them off. Thanks for your help. The Zodiac beasts were a formidable combat force when they got serious. Before today, Kim rarely experienced fights between martial artists. She was still processing the battle when Stephen came over. Every cultivator uses their energy in a different way. Don't blindly imitate them. You have to find a path that works for you. I don't have much experience. I don't know how long it'll take to get to their level. Cultivation takes time. Don't rush it. You have to cultivate with a clear mind. Even if you don't reach the level of ascension, I can still bring you to the Elysian realm. With the bone blade, we can travel back and forth. Whether you ascend or not, you don't have to give up your life here. After watching how intense a battle between cultivators could be, Kim was determined to reach the true immortal realm and ascend. She had worked hard to shorten the gap between her and Stephen. Tonight's assassination was a small interlude. Shadow wasted the money he spent, but there would be other chances. 5 days were almost up. Members of the Mystic Covenant were gradually crossing over to the human realm, and the mercenaries wouldn't have another opportunity to act until the exam resumed. After they fled from Stephen's villa, they left the heart of Annapolis without stopping. They paused to check their wounds on the outskirts of the city. When they didn't see any sign of infection, they knew they'd been played. Was he lying to scare us off? Does he not care about a cultivator's dignity? He has no sense of shame. We should have stayed and killed him no matter what happened. They could complain all they wanted, but there was no changing their failure. They could only turn to Shadow's bodyguard for further instructions. He gave them an advance payment. The full amount would be paid after they completed their mission. What's done is done. There will be another opportunity when the third round begins. Remember to pretend to be an ancient cultivator before you kill him. On the day of the third round, Stephen's token vibrated early in the morning. The Mystic Covenant was notifying their new members to gather. He mounted the ice dragon and headed to the Verglas Strait. Ever since the array in the mist was set up, the cold energy from the low temperatures in the ocean had frozen on the island. The emissaries, elders, and new members were standing on the ice in groups of 2s and 3s, waiting for the exam to begin. Shadow and the Sheridan brothers were together, planning Stephen's demise. Stephen leaped off the ice dragon's back and landed on the ice. He ignored their hostile glares and went up when Ren greeted him. When everyone arrived, the emissaries announced the rules for the third round. 5 members at a time would spar. Their task was to either force their opponents out of the ring or make them forfeit. The last one standing would proceed to the next round. It's hard for everyone to show off what they've learned, Stephen pointed out. The unlucky ones will be ganged up on, while the lucky ones will come out on top. Ren pointed at the layer of ice beneath their feet. We have beasts hiding below the ice. They'll take action when the ancient cultivators show up. This exam is a cover to capture the traitors, but don't be too relaxed. Your performance will affect my reputation. One by one, the new members went up to the emissaries to draw lots. Stephen wasn't in the first spar. While he was waiting, he secretly summoned the blue whale to get a better understanding of the Mystic Covenant's setup. While the Mystic Covenant's exam was underway, Warhawk's fleet set off for the Verglas Strait. Nadorun and 3 members of his team changed into the uniform of Warhawk's military and stood on deck, looking out over the ocean. It had been a long time since they'd set foot in the human realm. They'd gone from the strongest squad of a prestigious martial arts faction to traitors. The world was truly unpredictable. The human realm's weapons are fancy, but the humans themselves are weak, Nadorun observed. There aren't that many valuable cultivation resources in the realm either. Once their weapons are stolen, they're left defenseless. The only thing noteworthy about this realm is the scenery. A flock of crows landed in front of Parati. They were phantoms he'd manifested to investigate the area. The Mystic Covenant has frozen an island for the exam. We should keep a distance to avoid getting caught up in the explosion. Naderun turned around and asked the head of the Whitman family for his opinion. He wasn't sure how accurate the missiles on board would be when they were launched. We don't have to stay too far. Our advanced radar system has locked onto the target. The island will be blown up in seconds. The ships are also equipped with an underwater missile. We're in a cold region, but not all the water is frozen. Both types of weapons will be effective. Okay, prepare for battle. Warhawk's fleet didn't arouse Stephen's suspicion. The area around the Verglas Strait was open to every country. There were many warships sailing across the ocean. As the spar in the ring continued, the elders paid little attention. They reached out with their auras to search for suspicious individuals. Stephen wasn't interested in the spar either. He transmitted his voice to the whale hiding under the ice. Did you find anything strange? There are weird-looking beasts swimming around me. Their auras are much higher than mine. If a battle breaks out underwater, I'm not sure I can do much. The whale was the overlord of the ocean in the human realm, but it was nothing compared to the beast from the Elysian realm. Don't get caught up in the conflict, Stephen warned. The beasts are from the Mystic Covenant. If a fight breaks out, swim to the bottom. You can't handle the ancient cultivators on your own. If they show up, you won't be able to sense them. The ancient cultivators were targeting the Mystic Covenant. Getting involved in the conflict was a death sentence. The whale was Stephen's last resort as an escape route. If worse came to worst, he would hide in its stomach before it dove into the depths. The resistance of seawater was thousands of times stronger than in the air. The destructive impact of the battle would be lessened deep in the ocean. The first spar finished, and it was finally Stephen's turn. The Sheridan brothers and two other new members went into the ring. It was just his luck to be matched with them. The Sheridan brothers had been eyeing Mariah's factory for a long time. They probably couldn't wait to kill him and force him to give up his position as the honorary director. Stephen followed them to the ring and stayed at the edge, ready to forfeit at a moment's notice. The Sheridan brothers saw through his plan. They locked their inner energy onto him and prepared to strike. The emissaries announced the start of the spar. A wave of energy brushed against Stephen's back in an instant and surrounded the ring. If he forfeited, he'd have to get through the barrier of energy and risk being torn to pieces. From the Sheridan brothers' malicious expressions, he knew he had to hurry up and find an opening. He threw out a ball of fire. The flames looked out of place in the cold environment. The Sheridan brothers smirked. Even if you spend all your energy inside you, you can't go against nature. It's only a matter of time before your flames are extinguished. That's more than enough time to deal with you two, Stephen retorted. The ball of flame darted behind the Sheridan brothers. The other two members stood off to the side, watching the spar without lifting a finger. They were waiting for either the Sheridan brothers or Stephen to waste their energy before joining in. The younger brother turned around to extinguish the fire, but he was second too late. The flames burst, revealing shards of ice inside. They shot out, aiming for his chest. His older brother pulled him aside, and the ice missed him by a hair. The two of them unsheathed their swords and charged at Stephen, ready to pay him back tenfold for the trick he pulled. Right before their swords reached him, he gathered the spiritual energy of one of the zodiac beasts. His body melted and turned to liquid. The puddle divided into droplets and spread over the layer of ice before disappearing. The Sheridan brothers struck the ice with their swords, leaving slash marks on the surface. When Stephen didn't reappear, they turned to the emissaries. He left the ring. This is his loss. Shouldn't you make an announcement? Don't get ahead of yourselves. Concentrate on the spar. He's somewhere inside the ring. The emissaries' eyes were sharp. They'd already pinpointed Stephen's exact location. A phantom of a massive dragon with shimmering silver scales descended from the clouds. With one flap of its wings, a blizzard swept the ring. Under the array's enhancement, the icy wings were sharper than blades. They cut into the skin of the Sheridan brothers and the other two new members on the sidelines. As the wind blew over the ring, Stephen's liquid form was swept into the sky. He shifted back to his main body and condensed a barrier of inner energy. He was unshakable in the storm of ice and snow. The Sheridan brothers couldn't see him from inside the ring, but they knew he was up there. How long are you going to keep this up? Only cowards hide. The ending is what matters, Stephen shot back. How I get there is none of your concern. Where's your sense of shame? You're borrowing the power of beasts during an exam. This is against the rules. Training a beast and improving its cultivation took time, energy, and a huge amount of money. Most cultivators were busy with their own training. They didn't have time to help a beast with theirs. Stephen was one of the few lucky ones who had a chance encounter with beasts near the top of the hierarchy. The wind blew endlessly, and the 4 new members in the ring were forced to use all their energy to create a barrier to block out the cold. If they didn't do something soon, they would freeze and leave themselves vulnerable. The 4 of them gathered their energy at the tip of their weapons and released a piercing beam of light at the dragon. Their cultivations were higher than Stephen's, but the array was enhancing his phantom. It wasn't the ice dragon's real body, but the phantom was a realistic imitation. Its essence of ice and snow was amplified by the cold energy the array absorbed. The 4 of them had the upper hand against Stephen, but they were like an insect trying to shake a tree in front of an ice dragon's phantom. The emissaries and the elders disapproved of Stephen's tactic. Why is Stephen always taking advantage of loopholes instead of completing the task directly? He has a talent for searching for alternative methods to overcome obstacles. His cultivation is low, but his quick thinking makes up for it. Ren smoothed things over with a smile. He's just borrowing his beast's power. He didn't summon their main body. It's not against the rules. The purpose of the exam is to assess new members' cultivation. His beasts aren't interfering with that. I'll give him a warning after this is over. In less than a minute, the 4 new members were covered in a layer of ice and snow. With the array's enchantment, each snowflake weighed hundreds of pounds, and the weight multiplied exponentially with such a thick layer. Stephen didn't have any more time to waste on them. The ancient cultivators would be showing up any minute. Heavenly lightning descended, released from his fingertips, and struck the 4 new members, shattering the ice and charring their skin. They collapsed in a heap. They were unconscious, but their lives weren't in danger. Stephen faced the emissaries. I used up my energy. I can't continue, so I'll have to forfeit. He jumped out of the ring without hesitation, stunning the spectators. He was only 1 step away from victory. As the crowd whispered amongst themselves, Stephen made his way to the edge of the island. The ice dragon appeared in a flash of blue light and took on the form of a young man with white hair and blue eyes dressed in white. A disappointed look crossed his face. The array was stronger than I expected. You immobilized all 4 of them with a simple blizzard. You could have knocked them out of the ring before surrendering. There's no time for that, Stephen said. If the ancient cultivators are coming, now's the best time for them to show up. Break the ice and hide inside. Keep your auras hidden as much as possible. Don't show yourself no matter what happens. The ice dragon crouched down and tapped the frozen layer with his finger, shattering the ice and creating a deep hole that extended into the water. NATO Run and Parodi leaped off the deck and flew into the air, leaving their other team members on the ship. They assumed the Mystic Covenant was holding an exam in the human realm to exert their influence. This was the perfect chance to start a massacre and show the new members how wrong their decision was to join the faction. Parodi pointed at the mist shrouding the island. There's an array in that mist. They might be waiting for us. What's there to worry about? They're new members. They don't pose a threat to us. We can kill them from a distance. They suppressed their auras to a minimum and blended in with the environment, vanishing into the air. The new members' attention was on the ring, including those who'd already finished their spar. They could sense danger was rapidly approaching. Sharp knives cut through the air and bodies fell one after another. Blood dyed the snow and ice red. Their wounds were so deep that their bones could be seen. Before panic could ensue, the knives tore through the crowd again. They were enhanced with Nadoran and Parodi's spiritual energies, and they moved at tricky angles, making it difficult to guard against them. A few more unlucky members were wounded. If they didn't die from the initial injury, the violent surge of energy that invaded their bodies killed them once it destroyed their organs. The emissaries rushed to help as fast as they could. They snatched the knives from the air and crushed them into powder. Everyone, don't panic. Gather at the center of the island. We'll activate the defensive array immediately. The new members did as they were told. They rushed to the ring. In the chaos, no one noticed that Stephen had disappeared. After he forfeited, the whale surfaced, and he burrowed into its stomach. They were now hiding under the island with the rest of the beasts from the Elysian realm. The whale sensed the moment the blood mixed with ice. A fight broke out on the island. Judging from the amount of blood, there are a lot of casualties. There was no movement in the water above, and Stephen couldn't sense any residual energy. I can't sense the ancient cultivators. They usually make a scene whenever they attack. One of their techniques are destructive. Should I swim to the surface and investigate? No, stay where you are. It'll be dangerous if the ancient cultivators find you. The ice dragon, who was hiding in the ice, sensed the panic around the island and caught the scent of blood in the air, confirming the whale's speculation. The elders were infuriated as they searched the island. Many of their new students had been killed. They're getting more cunning. They found the traps we set up, and they're avoiding a direct confrontation. We can't let our preparations go to waste. Reach out with your aura and see what you can find. As their auras spread across the island, they locked onto a new member who was racing towards the ring. He was further from the other spectators, so he'd lagged behind when the bloodshed began. The elders saw knives heading his way. That could only mean the ancient cultivators were closing in on him. As they rushed over, they gathered their energy and unleashed a torrent of lightning and thunder. It barreled along the ice, deflecting the knives in the nick of time, and forced Nadorun and Parodi to remove their invisibility and defend themselves. The elders motioned for the new members to run along before facing the traitors. "There are only 2 of you. Are you confident in your defenses?" "This is karma," Nadorun said. "Your faction gave us that liquid to make our bodies indestructible. You made us who we are. Everyone has a choice. You chose to betray our faction, and your betrayal will end today." The elders didn't need to wait for all the ancient cultivators to gather. Nadorun was their captain. They needed to get rid of him to ruin their morale. Tracy's sword extended and coiled around Nadorun and Parodi like a snake, while the destructive tsunami of energy from Tyrek swept towards them. Nadorun and Parodi were forced to retreat. They jumped into the air and dashed away from the island. Tyrek's explosive energy cracked the surface of the ice, and the impact was transmitted into the water. Fear welled up inside the whale. "We should leave. If we miss our chance, it's hard to say what will happen later. The beasts around us are getting restless too. A huge battle is about to break out." Before Stephen could make a decision, he received a call from Jace. The commotion on the island had alerted the U.S. military, and they were concerned about his safety. "Are you okay, Mr. Adams? Should we send a team for support?" "No, there's a fight going on, but I'm not involved." The martial artists in the Leviathan unit and the palace were strong, but they hadn't reached the level of ascension. They'd be killed if they came. Stephen's tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Jace switched the topic to a valuable piece of information. "The satellite discovered in Warhawk's fleet 200 miles southeast of the island. They claimed they were here to test a new weapon, but Dr. Dalton believes their motives were suspicious. We've conducted an investigation, but we haven't found anything yet." Stephen was reminded of his conversation with Dr. Dalton a few days ago. It was unusual for the higher-ups of Warhawk's parliament to openly compete with each other. To maintain the country's stability, they subtly took turns to run the country. But a few days ago, a majority had gone against the head senator's ambition and agreed with the head of the Whitman family to waste resources testing an unfinished weapon. "Notify our fleet stationed in Cadis to prepare to take action." "Yes, sir." Stephen summoned the ice dragon to his spiritual world. As the whale dove deeper into the ocean, the conflict on the surface intensified. The Mystic Covenant and the ancient cultivators were evenly matched. Neither party could gain the upper hand in a short amount of time. Nadorun's goal was to kill the new members of the expeditionary team. He transmitted his voice to the head of the Whitman family on the ship and ordered him to begin the operation. Missiles streaked across the sky, heading straight for the island. The new members had exhausted their energy during the spars. Their survival during the incoming bombardment would depend on their luck. Nadorun and Parodi flew above the island with 2 chains in their hands. Complex arrays had been engraved, and yellow runes with a suppression effect hung from the chain. The 3 emissaries spotted them and activated the defensive array in the mist. The cold energy stored with the diagram flowed over the island and crashed down on Nadorun and Parodi. But they weren't about to be outdone. They formed a net with the chains overhead to block out the array's power. The emissaries noticed frost creeping up Nadorun and Parodi's arms. Their bodies were hard to destroy, but they could still be frozen. The human realm is a low-level plane, but the array has absorbed a large amount of spiritual energy from the region. Your chains can't block it. Nadorun and Parodi responded with a triumphant grin before rushing into the mist. Where are they going? The closer they are to the array, the faster they'll freeze. Are they strong enough to break the array? Before the emissaries or the elders could react, the missiles broke through the mist, and an unprecedented explosion shook the island. Smoke filled the air as the thick layer of ice vaporized into steam. In the midst of the destruction, the elders signaled for the beasts to rescue the new members. The emissaries flew to the array thousands of feet above the island. Aside from the glowing chains, there were no trace of Nadorun and Parodi. The suppression ruins on the chains had limited the array's effects, preventing it from blocking the missiles. The emissaries reached out with their auras, but found nothing. The faction leader was going to be furious when he heard about this. The ancient cultivators were getting better at strategizing. They no longer charged blindly into battle. No one had expected them to use advanced technological weapons from the human realm to attack the island. The element of surprise had made it even easier for them to succeed. As the fire dispersed, nothing remained on the island except floating chunks of ice. They were dyed red with blood, but not a single body was left behind. Whether the new members were alive or dead, the aquatic beasts had taken them away. The emissaries left to report to the faction leader, while the elders stayed behind to deal with the aftermath. "I didn't see Stephen anywhere. Where did your student go?" Tyrek asked, scanning the island. "Do you think those ancient cultivators took him?" During the chaos, Ren had forgotten about his student. He quickly infused his spiritual energy into the token to establish a connection with Stephen. Relief washed over him as his familiar voice rang out. "What's the situation, Mr. Ren? Do you have something you'd like me to take care of?" "There's been heavy casualties on our side. Where have you been? Are you injured? Did they get to you?" "I'm fine. I'm tracking the ancient cultivators. They're conspiring with another country. It's hard to find them when they're using someone as their cover." "Tracking them is okay, but don't start a conflict. You'll get yourself killed." "I know. I'll be careful." The elders couldn't grasp the complicated relations between the major world powers and the human realm in such a short amount of time. This was an issue that couldn't be resolved with strength, and they had to leave it to Stephen to handle. Jace had sent him the coordinates to Warhawk's fleet. The whale was tracking it down at a distance. Dr. Dalton's speculation was getting closer to reality. The subtle shift in power among Warhawk's higher-ups wasn't natural. The ancient cultivators were controlling them from behind the scenes to manipulate their decisions. The U.S. military was observing Warhawk's fleet through the satellites. They informed Stephen when the two ancient cultivators returned to the deck. The whale stopped 25 miles away from the warships. Stephen gave Jace the order to fire, which he relayed to the U.S. Naval Force stationed in Cadus. Stephen had publicly retired from his position as the sovereign, but internally the country's authority remained in his hands. Hundreds of long-range missiles were fired from the fortress at Cadus's port. The gunpowder contained the improved version of the Asora's weapons. The researchers had used the ores and crystals from the Asora realm and ground them into powder, mixing them into a certain ratio to upgrade them. The high-speed missiles didn't emit an aura or fluctuations of energy like cultivators, but the radar on Warhawk's fleet detected them. The head of the Whitman family hurriedly reported the situation to NATO Run. "Our radar has detected firepower of unknown origin heading this way. It'll reach our fleet in 50 seconds. "You can't stop it?" "Our high-speed, short-range, and automatic tracking cannons on the ship can target the missiles, but we can't guarantee 100% chance of intercepting the attack. If even one missile lands, we'll sink." Naderun gestured for his 3 teammates to check on the missiles. They flew into the air and scanned their surroundings. It was hard to miss the blazing streaks of fire trailing behind the missiles. The human realm's technology was superior to other realms, but cultivators possessed true power. They infused their energy into their swords and threw them at the missiles to set off an explosion in the sky. The 3 ancient cultivators fearlessly launched their swords at the missiles. The clash of metal against the surface of the missiles in the front triggered their sensors and set off an explosion. Shockwaves overlapped, amplifying their power by several hundred times. The 3 cultivators were sent flying when the shockwaves crashed into them. NATO Run lost his indifferent attitude. The missiles were much stronger than the weapons they'd transported from Warhawk. If he stayed on the ship, there was a risk the explosion would kill him despite his near-indestructible body. At the critical moment, he pulled the head of the Whitman family off the deck and dove into the frigid seawater. The missiles that hadn't exploded continued towards their target. The cannons on the warship fired several thousand rounds per minute, but they weren't enough to counter the missiles. Even the explosions in the water from the missiles that were missed posed a risk to the fleet. Stephen was hiding at the bottom of the sea, but he could see the light from the explosions filtering through the surface of the water through the whale's eyes. He was confused when the whale subconsciously turned around and swam behind a coral reef in an attempt to hide. "What's the matter? Didn't the shockwave reach this deep in the ocean? Are you hurt?" "No, but there's something in the water. I think your enemies jumped off the ship. We need to leave." "Okay, let's get out of here." Stephen regrouped with the elders, and they headed back to Annapolis together. Warhawk's fleet had been annihilated, and they'd lost track of the ancient cultivators. Everyone gathered around the table at Stephen's villa with dejected expressions, not knowing what to do next. Stephen initiated the discussion. He wasn't the sovereign anymore, but the authority was still in his hands in certain situations. "The ancient cultivators are going to continue launching attacks at random intervals while avoiding a face-to-face confrontation. They're trying to get rid of the Mystic Covenant's members one group at a time. If you want to lure them out of hiding and stop the sneak attacks, you'll have to stay in the human realm. If you all go back to the Elysian realm, the attacks will only get worse for both of our worlds, and then they'll recover their strength. They'll launch a full-scale attack on the faction." The ancient cultivators' methods were simple but effective. The human realm was a lower plane. The spiritual energy in the air was thin, and the energy contained in natural ores and crystals were limited. The terrain was scenic, and life was peaceful, but it wasn't a beneficial environment to cultivate. And even if the elders chose to stay in the human realm, they didn't have the authority to mobilize and transfer the faction's combat force. Would it be possible to use your country's intelligence network to find the traitor's location? Wren asked. Stephen respected his teacher, but this was one thing he couldn't compromise. They haven't reached the level of ascension. The ancient cultivators are a pressing issue, but I won't sacrifice my people. While they were at an impasse, they heard that Warhawk had released a statement from the TV. The news announced that their fleet had completed tests for a newly developed weapon, and it was ready to be mass-produced and used in battle. Its range covered a wide area, and it was useful over the ocean. As the person in charge of the test, the head of the Whitman family received recognition and praise from the Parliament. Stephen was used to Warhawk twisting the truth to cover up for their mistakes, but he was surprised to see the head of the Whitman family unharmed. The only explanation was that the ancient cultivators had brought him to safety before the missiles hit. Do you notice anything strange? He asked the elders. His eyes are unfocused, and his movements are stiff. It's highly likely he's under the ancient cultivators' control. Ever since Warhawk threatened our country at the northern border, they've never been this open about their hostility. I suspect the ancient cultivators are pulling the strings. We'll find some leads after we investigate their parliament. The atmosphere at Warhawk's parliament was filled with tension. The head senator, Merrill, flew into a rage in the office and vented her anger on the military's upper management. She was the first to be informed that the fleet had been wiped out. She had been opposed to the operation from the very beginning, but the majority of the higher-ups had agreed with the head of the Whitman family and overrode her opinion. She had no choice but to manipulate the media to cover up for the fleet's destruction and their mistakes. What is going on? You launched an attack on an island to the north of the Verglas Strait. This has nothing to do with our test. Did you not consider the consequences of provoking Scotty? The director of the military department bore the brunt of Merrill's anger. He didn't think a simple test could go this wrong. The head of the Whitman family had acted on his own without informing the superiors and subordinates of his decision. He didn't ask for approval. He should take responsibility for his actions and comply with our investigation. There was no need to say anything more. Pinning the responsibility on the head of the Whitman family was a given. Merrill had already signed the documents approving a law enforcement team to investigate the head of the Whitman family. Praising him in the media could be considered preserving his last bit of dignity. Now it was time for him to talk. As night fell, the law enforcement team surrounded the Whitman family's mansion in the suburbs. They were a prestigious royal family, but defying Warhawk's laws was grounds for an execution. The head of the Whitman family was tidying his suit in the living room. They're going to investigate me. Someone has to take responsibility. We can't be seen together for the time being. Run nodded indifferently. He didn't care about the life and death of a human. The head of the Whitman family left the mansion. The commotion outside didn't last very long before silence returned to the neighborhood. The entire mansion was empty except for the ancient cultivators. They were getting restless. Caesar, one of the more impatient members of Run's team, voiced his complaints. What are we waiting for? We've killed most of the faction's new members. This is our chance to use the royal families to deal with the elders. If we want to take over the human realm, we need the U.S., Parodi argued. To make this happen, we need to use Warhawk to exhaust their forces and pressure the military into submitting. We can't play our cards right. The Robinson and Whitman families have a lot of influence. We can't sacrifice them for nothing. During the investigation in Warhawk, they had confirmed that the U.S. had the most advanced technology in the human realm. They needed their resources to pose a threat to the Mystic Covenant. Run considered his options. The Parliament won't execute the head of the Whitman family. At most, they'll take away some of his authority. Executing him will affect their reputation with the public, and they need votes to be re-elected. For now, let's bring the rest of our people to Warhawk. Their recovery will be better in a more comfortable environment. Later in the week, an international flight landed at a small seaside city in Warhawk. The holiday resort was owned by Warhawk, and it was the real estate of a multinational business group in the U.S. Stephen and the elders stepped off the plane in casual clothes, pretending to be tourists. I was surprised by how advanced the city in the Asura realm was, but it's nothing compared to the human realm, Wren praised, fascinated by the advanced city structure. It hasn't been that long since they started, Stephen replied. They'll get there at some point. Tyrek shook his head in disapproval. Wouldn't it be better to spend your time and energy on cultivation? The city might be pleasing to the eye, but it'll fall with one blow. After checking into their hotel, a group of intelligence officers from the Leviathan unit came to Stephen's room to report. Their duties were to disguise themselves at Warhawk's Military Research Institute to monitor Amber and Smitty and carry out investigations as needed. There have been unidentified individuals entering and leaving the Whitman and Robinson mansions. Ever since they arrived, the two families started opposing the head senator's goals. The intelligence officers handed Stephen the photos they took in secret. He recognized the suspicious individuals with one look. They changed their clothes and blended in with human society, but their faces gave them away. They were the ancient cultivators. Tracy frowned. They really are hiding in Warhawk. If they start a war against the U.S., it'll be the chance they need to take control of the conflict and turn the tide in their favor. The U.S. and Warhawk had been at odds for years. War didn't come as a surprise to Stephen, but the problem was the ancient cultivators were manipulating Warhawk's higher-ups behind the scenes. The Mystic Covenant couldn't interfere with the internal affairs of other realms. The ancient cultivators had taken advantage of this fact and targeted Warhawk to instigate conflict. We'll search the royal family's mansions tonight and look for the ancient cultivators, Tyrek suggested. Are you planning on starting a fight in the city? Stephen asked incredulously. Why does it matter? This isn't the U.S. Destroying this place won't affect you. Stephen patiently explained the interconnected development of multinational corporations. The U.S. and Warhawk were currently at peace. Both official and private investors were involved in both countries. A battle between cultivators could easily destroy a city. Killing 1,000 enemies could result in the loss of just as many more of their own people. The safest way is to imitate their tactic and get a few higher-ups on our side. The conflict will be considered an internal competition and it won't affect the other countries. The elders weren't completely confident that they could take down the ancient cultivators on their own, so they agreed with Stephen's plan. Warhawk's Research Institute was located on the south on an island, forming a large industrial park. Amber and Mitty hadn't been taking on too many projects lately, so they were put in charge of the institutes. At this time, they were in a meeting with a higher-up from the military, the director of the logistics department, Farid. The head of the Whitman family's gone against orders and almost started a war with another country. To conduct a thorough investigation, we need samples of the unfinished weapons and all relevant data. I'll prepare the documents, Mitty said. But we and our staff were just doing our job. If it's in line with the procedures, we're required to follow orders. The higher-ups understand that the Research Institute isn't at fault. They want you to draw a clear line between the Institute and the head of the Whitman family. Warhawk's logistics department was responsible for transporting weapons and arranging related war preparations. In terms of functionality, it was more like a warehouse than a logistics department. After so many years of working closely with the research institutes, Farid was on good terms with most of the staff. With the official business out of the way, the three of them moved on to other topics. I heard the higher-ups are stirring up trouble with other countries. The demand for research and development of weapons is rising. Shouldn't our budget for the next half of the year be higher? Farid had heard this request multiple times in the past. I understand, Miss Amber, but I'm not affiliated with the finance department. You should speak with them, not me. You're the director of the logistics department, and you have the right to influence the allocation of funds. We're not asking for much. We only hope to increase the research budget by $52 billion. Our warships have been on the decline lately, and with the recent incident, most of the funds will go to repairs. Please understand our difficulties. Amber and Mitty refused to give in. Warhawk's annual military expenditure was hundreds of billions. When put into perspective, their request wasn't that much. Farid compromised and expressed that he'd submit the corresponding bill to the Parliament for review. It's not easy to take money out of the national treasury. We'll need to meet some of the old-timers in Parliament. Even if the proposal is approved, the money will take some time to arrive. Amber and Mitty's smiles widened in satisfaction. Please do your best. We'll be waiting for your good news. As the sun set, the ocean became lively with fishing boats. Stephen and the elders boarded an inconspicuous boat and landed on the island. The White Research Institutes made it easy to distinguish them from the other buildings. They were heavily guarded by soldiers and surrounded by walls and barbed wire. The rest of the building was no different from holiday resorts. The Leviathan unit's intelligence team accompanied them were quick to notice the middle-aged man with his bodyguards. Mr. Adams, that's Farid. He's the director of Warhawk's logistics department. He has many supporters. Okay, he'll be perfect for our first chess piece. The elders reached out with their auras, covering dozens of miles. There was no trace of the ancient cultivators. This island's relatively safe. How long are we going to stay here? Not too long. We'll get him on our side and leave. We still need to check on Warhawk's military arsenal. Stephen and the elders followed Farad and his bodyguards in the dark for 15 minutes. They watched them enter a luxurious mansion. The lights turned on and laughter and music drifted from inside the house. One of the main reasons Farad had agreed to Amber and Mitty's request for higher funding was because of the Research Institute paying for his holiday expenses on the island. He lounged on a beach chair, smoking a cigar with a group of beautiful women in swimsuits around him. After the head of the Whitman family's mistake led to an entire fleet being wiped out, the number of overseas operations had decreased considerably. He didn't need to follow the higher-ups around and arrange for supplies anymore. The hard-won vacation put him in a good mood. Little did he know that Stephen and the elders had sneaked into the mansion and were about to change his fate. The bodyguards around him began their flattery at the right time. You've been working so hard for the country. It's only right for you to enjoy a life of luxury in return. Meryl has a year left for her term. The higher-ups are preparing to take over. Maybe you'll be elected head senator next term. Taking control of Warhawk's authority was harder than winning a lottery, but Farad had confidence. When I take her seat, I'll make all of you higher-ups at the Parliament. If we rely on those good-for-nothings, we'll never restore Warhawk's former glory. We need to be bold and committed to reform the country. His bodyguards grinned from ear to ear. Farad dismissed them with a wave of his hand. They were martial artists at the Grandmaster realm. He doubted he would need their protection tonight. This was Warhawk's territory. Who would dare to assassinate a high-ranking military officer? The bodyguards went upstairs to the room and gathered around the table to drink the night away. They only had a few glasses before Stephen sneaked up behind them from where he was hiding and knocked them out. The poor bodyguards fell off their chairs and collapsed on the floor. He carried them to the couch in the bed. Farad pushed open the door to his room with the women and was about to enjoy his nightly activities when he found an unfamiliar face in his room. He yelled for his bodyguards, but no one came running to help. Stephen casually waved his hand, and a breeze rendered the women unconscious, leaving the terrified Farad alone. Whether you live or die is up to you. Who the hell are you? Farad demanded as he backed up against the railing. He cast cautious glances around the mansion, but there was no sign of his bodyguards. That could only mean the intruder had taken them out. How much do you want? Name your price. If you kill me, Warhawk will hunt you down for the rest of your life until you're dead. I want the power you hold. We can work together. I'll let you take over the head senator's position when Meryl's term is over. The country's wealth and glory will belong to you alone. Farad grasped the threat behind his words. The intruder was after the entire country, and he needed him to be his puppet. As a high-ranking military officer, Farad couldn't give in that easily. He had a reputation to uphold. Whoever you are, don't think too highly of yourself. Warhawk isn't run by one person. Every decision is made after a vote. No worries, we'll deal with those higher-ups when we get there. Things will work out in your favor. What if I refuse? You won't have a good ending. The two of them held each other's gazes as tension filled the room. Farad could sense Stephen's aura due to the gap between their cultivations. The only thing he could sense was a deep, unfathomable pressure within him. After working in the military for so many years, Farad had gone through many life-and-death situations. He made up his mind and ran to the edge of the pool. He shoved his hands into the water, transforming the waves into translucent bullets with his inner energy. At this distance, it was impossible for the intruder to react fast enough and dodge. To his surprise, when the bullets of water cut through the air, they stopped inches away from the intruder's face. A barrier of flame surrounded him and melted the barrage of bullets. Is this your answer? Stephen asked. Farad didn't respond. He unsheathed his hidden dagger strapped around his waist. The blade glinted from the light of the moon and he lunged for the intruder, aiming for his vitals. The elders in the room paid no attention to the commotion and admired the resort from the window. From the difference in their cultivations, it was obvious what would happen next. Farad's eyes widened in shock when Stephen caught the blade between two fingers. How is this possible? Are you not human? He exerted force on the hilt, but the blade didn't move an inch. I doubt you'd ever understand, Stephen said, burning the blade into a molten lump of iron. Farad leaped back to escape, but Stephen was faster. He dashed behind him and threw a dart at the back of his head. The instant it pierced Farad's skull, his limbs went slack, and his eyes dimmed. What are you doing? Wren called out with a frown. You just shot him in the head. He's useless to us if he's dead. He's alive, Stephen reassured him. This is an advanced technology the U.S. developed to control the brain. The wound on the back of Farad's head was smaller than a sewing needle. The AI chip had been healed. A few minutes later, he regained consciousness and stood next to Stephen respectfully. The elders were intrigued. It's hard to believe you can obtain this level of mental control with the needle. It's just a small trick, Stephen said. It only works against people with lower mental energies and cultivations. Farad went into the room and placed his laptop on the table. He pulled up a map of Warhawk's military warehouses. There were hundreds of red dots on the map. Aside from their own country, they had warehouses across the world. When a warehouse was present, a team of armed forces would be stationed there. It seemed Warhawk's ambition to take over the world hadn't diminished over the years. Farad pointed at the screen. This is the information about the transfer of supplies. The team stationed at this warehouse is about to set off. A group of transport ships were docked at Warhawk's port on the west coast. A steady stream of resources were being loaded on board. According to the route, they were about to set off for Cadis. We're following the trajectory of missiles that wiped out the fleet and found out they were fired from Cadis, Farad continued. The military's planning to launch an attack in retaliation if diplomatic discussions fail. After a long period of construction and renovation, Cadis's defenses had reached the same level as the U.S. They could easily stop the attack, but it wasn't an efficient use of resources. Stephen called Jace and gave him instructions. A few hours later, the U.S. released an official announcement informing the public of pirates on the eastern waters and warning all the ships out at sea to be careful. That way, the U.S. military could disguise themselves as pirates and steal the supplies from Warhawk's transport ships to delay their confrontation with Cadis. It should be an easy task. Without a clear goal and aligned interests, it was unlikely for Maplewood to send their warships to escort Warhawk's ships. Stephen left the rest to Farad. He was the director of the logistics department. After a brief investigation, he should be able to find every suspicious individual conspiring with the ancient cultivators. Late into the night, Stephen and the elders boarded a ship off the island. They looked out over the deck and saw the brightly lit resort in the distance. We've done a lot today, but we're no closer to finding the ancient cultivators, Tracy complained. Be patient. The ancient cultivators haven't fully recovered after leaving the holy ruins. For the time being, they won't be able to launch a full-scale attack against the Mystic Covenant. They need to expand their forces and resources in the dark. When they realize Warhawk is of no use to them anymore, they'll abandon them and come out of hiding. Stephen was only responsible for setting the stage. The final battle would be left up to the Mystic Covenant. The elders were expecting a smooth progression, but things were getting more complicated by the day. It would take some time for the ancient cultivators to show themselves. In the meantime, they could only stay in the human realm and assist Stephen, while they waited for further instructions from the faction leader. After the incident near the Verglis Strait, Merrill was concerned that the wealthy and royal families would follow the head of the Whitman family's example and conspire with one another to remove her from her position. She increased security around the Parliament and stationed more guards at the entrances and exits to the capital. Everyone entering or leaving was required to give the security personnel their fingerprints to prevent criminals from sneaking in. Air traffic control was even more strict. We can spend the night out here, Stephen said, gesturing to the forest. It's not as comfortable as living in the city, but it'll have to do. We don't know where the ancient cultivators are. If we're spotted, our plans will be ruined. When Farad completes his investigation, I'll ask him to find us a better place to stay. The elders agreed, and they made their way across the road to the forest. As they were crossing, a motorcade of black vehicles roared down the path. The elders sensed the ancient cultivators' auras. What a waste of time. We found them. They're in those vehicles. Wait, you can't attack them now, Stephen protested. If we cause a commotion, Warhawk will find us. The elders ignored his warning and pulled him into the forest out of sight. Their priority was to deal with the ancient cultivators. The human realm was none of their concern. A blade of light cut through the darkness and pierced the tires. The vehicles swerved off the road and crashed into the guardrail. The elders were about to surround them when the windows shattered, and a group of familiar faces jumped out. The Captain NATO run wasn't among them. Stephen was exasperated. Mr. Tyrek, can't you consider the safety of your fellow elder student? You're getting up there in age. Why are you so impulsive? Why waste time scheming on the sidelines when we can kill them here? Tyrek retorted. The Leviathan unit's intelligence team had never felt such a powerful aura before. Mr. Adams, Warhawk has a fortress stationed near this forest. If we make a scene, they'll be here in less than 15 minutes. There's no stopping the elders and the ancient cultivators. Leave without me. I'll escape with my dragon if the situation calls for it. A battle on the road broke out abruptly. Neither party said a word. They unsheathed their weapons and lunged for each other's throats. Even the elders were in disguise. The ancient cultivators were still able to recognize them from their auras. The sound of metal hitting metal rang out in the night as a surge of aura filled the road. Stephen concentrated, but the most he could make out were blurry afterimages. He couldn't follow their movements. The Leviathan unit couldn't see anything. The enemies were clearly out of their league. They acknowledged Stephen's order and left first. The elders joined their swords to cast an array. Streaks of light with protruding thorns spread across the road and intertwined. The ancient cultivators leaped into the air to avoid the array. Ren condensed a blanket of mist. The fog spread and shrouded the road. The energy inside the ancient cultivators resonated with the mist, and they lost control of their circulation. We need to land. There's an array on the ground, but it's safer than the air. Send a distress signal to the captain. He and the others are nearby. It won't take them long to get here. Ren wasn't about to let them escape. A low buzzing sounded from the mist, resembling a horde of insects desperately flapping their wings. It was a barrier of sound waves. The interference prevented the transmission of voices. Most of the ancient cultivators were injured and had a hard time gaining an advantage over the elders. NATO Run had arranged vehicles for his subordinates to pick up their injured companions from the base of the Bermuda Triangle and bring them to Warhawk for a faster recovery. Their journey had been smooth until the elders intercepted them. When the ancient cultivators landed on the ground, the thorny tendrils of light wound towards them. One of them gathered his energy and slammed his fists against the pavement. The road collapsed, and dust spewed into the air. "If we keep this up, the others will come running," Tracy said. "Forget about killing them," Tierek ordered. "Capture one of them, and let's get out of here." The elders agreed and gave up on long-distance techniques. They rushed up to the ancient cultivators and engaged in close combat. Their coordinated teamwork forced the ancient cultivators back. Tracy slammed her palm into one of the ancient cultivator's chests. Energy flowed inside him, weighing down his muscles and meridians like concrete. He tried to put up one final struggle, but it was futile. His body was as heavy as lead. When he stumbled, Tracy grabbed his throat and dragged him into the forest. His companions rushed over to rescue him, but the array on the ground erupted in a pillar of light. Beams of light rained from the sky, cutting their chase short and forcing them to defend. The shower of light crashed into their swords, and explosions echoed in the night. When the smoke cleared, silence returned to the road. The battle had been decided. The ancient cultivators' loss left them dumbfounded. They'd lost one of their injured companions, and the elders had disappeared. They couldn't have gone far. Should we hunt them down? We're not in peak condition. We're no match for them. The captain's going to be furious when he finds out. This was a simple mission, but we messed it up. They were filled with uneasiness, but they had no choice but to head back to the mansion with their heads lowered in shame and relay the bad news to NATO Run. When everyone left, Stephen stepped out from behind the bushes. The elders had left in a hurry, and they didn't have time to inform him of their plans. The elders were impulsive and somewhat unreliable. He could have easily been caught up in their conflict. Stephen heard the rumble of Warhawk's off-road vehicles speeding down the highway. They'd been alerted when the surveillance cameras on both sides of the road stopped working. He headed in the opposite direction to avoid confronting them. As NATO Run listened to his subordinate's report, his expression darkened. The Mystic Covenant's exam had been ruined. He wasn't expecting the elders to still be here after so many days. Luckily, we only lost one of us. Our team won't be affected too much. Everyone else, stay in the mansion and recover. Should we rescue him? Parodi asked. No, there are no prisons in the human realm that can restrain us. It's possible the elders took him back to the Elysian realm for treatment. His life won't be in danger for now. The dead have no value. The head of the Whitman family's investigation had come to an end. He was given a warning, but he didn't have to shoulder much of the responsibility. If he was sent to prison or executed, the higher-ups would lose valuable votes from the public and him. The chain of consequence would be hard to manage. To save everyone the headache, he was released and allowed to go home. The missiles came from somewhere in Cadus. When are we going to confront them? NATO Run asked the head of the Whitman family while he entered the house. The military is mobilizing weapons. They'll be ready in 3 days. You're not in charge of the operation, right? Unfortunately, no. The head of the Whitman family replied with a sigh. There was a hint of exhaustion in his eyes. For the past few days, he had a battle of wits and courage with the investigator in the interrogation room. He had to endure intense questioning for several days before they finally let him go. But after his mistake, they wouldn't entrust such an important operation to him. Then I'll sneak onto their ships as a regular martial artist. find an opportunity to attack the businesses affiliated with the U.S. and Cadiz. The head of the Whitman family didn't know exactly how strong NATO-Run and his team were, but the U.S. military was formidable. Their naval force is stationed in Cadiz's waters. It's not a good idea to start a conflict. I'm not going there to start a fight. I'm just going to oversee their negotiations. Having skilled martial artists by their side is a way to put pressure on Cadiz. Even if things do get messy, none of them are a match for me. Stephen's life had calmed down considerably after his encounter with the ancient cultivators in the middle of the road. He didn't know where the elders were, and he couldn't contact them with his token. He was left with no other option but to use the Leviathan unit's network to monitor Warhawk's latest movements. They deployed and supplied their overseas fortress, and the royal family in Cadiz had been notified to give a reasonable explanation for the attack near the Verglas Strait. Liam made a trip to Cadiz with several advisors from the military to handle the diplomatic discussions. Stephen had retired, and it wasn't appropriate for him to show his face or deal with messy matters like this. The king, Javon Lawrence, didn't have time to care about extravagant receptions. He immediately called them to the palace. His dark circles made it clear when he'd been stressing about the spontaneous attack for days. Why did you attack Warhawk's fleet? It doesn't make any sense. We've established a mutual truce. Liam smiled to reassure him. There's no need to panic. Cadiz and the U.S. are practically neighbors. We wouldn't let outsiders come here and make a mess of your country. Besides, they provoked us first. Warhawk attacked one of our islands and killed our citizens. We were just returning the favor. Before the Mystic Covenant's exam resumed in the human realm, the military had mobilized a reconnaissance satellite to lock onto the island to monitor the faction for Stephen. They'd faithfully recorded Warhawk's missiles bombarding the island. The deceased members of the faction were treated as U.S. citizens. As the days passed, Warhawk's police department didn't release any news about the battle in the middle of the road, which meant they had no leads. All they could do was send more guards to the area for patrol and increase surveillance of the suburbs. Farrad took advantage of these countermeasures to question his subordinates about the Whitman family. Why did they fire so many of their staff and bodyguards at home? Who are their guests? I don't recognize them. And why did the head of the family cancel his plans for public appearances? His subordinates shared confused looks. They couldn't understand why Farrad was paying attention to the Whitman family. The investigators had closed the case and concluded that the incident was an accident. And what did all this have to do with the logistics department? We can't search the Whitman family's mansion without a justifiable reason. But we've heard that there's been a strange scent of medicinal herbs outside the house. The head of the family or his guests could be injured. This piece of information piqued Farrad's interest. Regardless of whether it was credible or not, he passed it on to Stephen.